In the previous session, we tried to understand what exactly the matter was made up of. And in understanding that, we made a conclusion that matter is made up of particles. And we also understood that these particles are so tiny in nature. Now, in this session, we will try to understand what are the characteristics of those particles that actually make up a substance that we call it as matter. So here, in understanding the characteristics of the particles that are present in the matter, let's try to understand what exactly is the word characteristic means. So in understanding that, I would like to give you an example. Suppose you are going out to buy your new laptop. So in buying a new laptop, your expectations are that you wanted certain features in a laptop. Maybe a good graphic card, or you are looking for a good storage, or you are looking for a good processor. So these are all the features you are looking for in a laptop. May I say here, the features are nothing but the characteristics of your laptop that you are looking for. So here also, when I'm looking at the characteristics of the particles that are present in matter are nothing but the features of those particles that are present in the matter. So these particles are actually responsible for the way the matter is actually behaving. So in understanding those characteristics, we will try to understand those characteristics by explaining not just one or two experiments, by analyzing 9 experiments. So in understanding all these 9 experiments, okay, we will start with one experiment which we actually understood in the previous session, that is mixing of water with either sugar or potassium permanganate. That is, you are mixing water with sugar or potassium permanganate. So the observation that we have seen was the sugar particles actually started getting into the spaces of water. Because of that, you did not see any rise in water level. That was the first observation that you have seen. And the second thing, in terms of permanganate, you started adding permanganate, just 3 pieces of those crystals into water, and that started actually making the whole substance pink. Even after so many dilutions, you have seen that was still pink in color. The reason was the particles were getting into the spaces that are present between the particles of water. So this experiment actually tells us that there is actually space between particles of matter. So matter has particles and there is some space between the particles of matter. So this is the first conclusion. So what is the first conclusion? Matter has particles, and in between the particles there is something, that is space. So this is the first characteristic of matter. You understand? And the second experiment, we will try to understand a unique property of matter that is known as diffusion. What is it? Diffusion. So in understanding this diffusion, I would like to take one example. Have you ever, seen an incense stick? And what happens when you place an incense stick in your hand, okay, and you try to actually smell it? Do you feel the smell? No, right? So without burning this incense stick, you will not feel any smell. Then how about you go very close to it? Do you feel any smell? Yes, you feel little smell when you go very close to it. But whereas if I lit it, okay, then the smell start to actually fill the whole room. We will try to understand what is the characteristics of those particles of matter which is making this phenomena, or which is making this whole room actually smell really awesome, and what is that characteristic of matter that is responsible for this. So in understanding this, first thing, we have to understand something, a term that is known as diffusion. So as we have seen that the particles of matter has space between them and they are made up of particles. So when I lit an incense stick, the first thing that's happening here is this incense stick has some volatile perfume. So as I heated it, it has started getting into the atmosphere. That means this is started getting into the atmosphere. So here, this volatile perfume which is getting into the atmosphere started getting distributed into the places where that perfume or that particles of this volatile perfume are not present. The process or the phenomena of distribution of those volatile particles into the areas where it is not available is known as diffusion. So diffusion is the process of mixing up of this volatile perfume into the surroundings. So that is all about diffusion. So now this diffusion depends on various parameters. The first parameter here is the kinetic energy of the particles that make up this volatile gas perfume. Okay, these particles that are actually present when they are not lit in this incense stick, they are present with the incense stick. So here they are actually on that incense stick, but when I lit it, they are getting into they are escaping from the incense stick. So that means, may I say here, the particles of the volatile perfume has some kinetic energy which got increased. Because of that, they actually moved away from the stick. Correct? So here, that is something which would actually determine the diffusion of this volatile perfume into the atmosphere. You understand? And the second thing is into which medium this diffusion is happening into. And if you look at both the cases, here in the case 1 or case 2, both are diffusing into air. But the only difference that made here was the kinetic energy of the particles that are volatile perfume particles which are diffusing into air. So because of the increase in the kinetic energy of these particles, so why is the kinetic energy of these particles increasing? Because the temperature is increasing. So here the temperature is a factor that determines the kinetic energy of the particles that are diffusing into the atmosphere. So more is the kinetic energy of these particles that are diffusing into the atmosphere, so more is its ability to spread out across the room, more is its ability to mix into the room, more is its ability to diffuse into the room. You understand this? So here, that is the reason when you lit an incense stick, you feel the smell better compared to when you are not lighting the incense stick. You understand this? And this is the second experiment. We have seen the first experiment and the second experiment. Then I would like to go with the third experiment. If you're going to a restaurant and you're sitting just beside a table and there is some good biryani, the smell, I have experienced this so many times, when I'm sitting in this table and there is a guy who is coming and serving this people who are sitting beside me biryani, the smell is so good, there is so much very good aroma. I feel like, my mouth actually starts watering when I actually have that smell. So why is that smell actually reaching me? It is because of the same phenomena that I called as diffusion. There also the particles, that the aroma particles which are present inside the biryani are getting into the atmosphere and they are actually diffusing into the air places where there is no particles of those aroma particles. So they're getting into those places. Because of that, the whole smell gets distributed into that particular area. Do you understand this? Why do you smell that? So the third observation or the third experiment that we have seen is a restaurant serving some food. Okay. So these two are very similar. And the fourth one we will look out here is, okay, Suppose I am taking a beaker of water in this, and into this water I am adding ink. I am adding what? Ink here. Okay. And similarly, I'm taking one more beaker, and into this beaker to the sides I'm adding honey. Now, can you tell me what would be the observation after certain time? So first thing is the ink will start to go down because of that gravity and start gets mixing with water. Correct? But similarly, your honey also will slowly move down and start mixing with water. But I have a question for you. So you will see the color of the ink, maybe example, if it is red in color, the whole water starts to get red before honey actually gets dissolved into this water. How is that possible and why is that possible? Here also, the reason behind this is also diffusion. So here we are talking about the particles of ink diffusing into water. Here we spoken about the particles of the perfume, volatile perfume diffusing into the air. Here honey is diffusing into this water. But before we go forward, we have understood that that is something kinetic energy which determines the diffusion of those particles into the medium in which they are present. So here the kinetic energy of the particles of ink is more compared to that of the honey. So why they are more? So in trying to understand why they are more, the particles actually, hold together by certain forces of attraction. So the more the strength of the attraction that they are hold together by, then it becomes very difficult for the particles to move away from them. So if the substance that is diffusing into the other itself is hold together strongly, then it becomes very difficult for the particles that are already hold together strongly to move away from it into other substance. So because of that, so here the attraction of particles of honey is so strong compared to that of the ink. Hence the kinetic energy of this ink will be more. Hence the diffusion of the ink in this water will also be more. You understand this? And we will see one more experiment, that is a fifth experiment. Okay, in this experiment we will try to understand taking two beakers which are filled with water. One is hot and one is cold water, and into these beakers we are adding copper sulphate. What is it? Copper sulphate, which is a blue colored salt. When we add this, just like potassium permanganate that we have seen, this gets dispersed into this hot water and cold water, making the solutions blue in color. So in making the solutions blue in color, there is something that's happening. So these particles are getting into this mediums. So that means the particles of copper sulphate are diffusing into hot water and diffusing into cold water. So we have understood that diffusion depends on two factors. One is the kinetic energy of the particles of copper sulphate that are diffusing, and the second thing is medium. So here the medium is hot water and here it is cold water. And let me tell you something, whenever in a medium, whenever there is a change in temperature, if it is hot water is also made up of particles of water. So if I'm increasing the temperature of the water, that means I'm actually increasing the kinetic energy of the medium. So if I'm increasing the kinetic energy of the medium, that means they will have more ability to diffuse into other substances where there is no water. So here, because of that, the hot water gets more diffused with copper sulphate, whereas the cold water gets less diffused with copper sulphate compared to that of the hot water. So here it tells us that the medium temperature also matters in terms of diffusion. So more the temperature of the medium, more will be the diffusion. You understand this? And the most important conclusion that we'll make here is, so whenever you have a medium, so if the medium is a gas, then the diffusion will be more compared to that of the liquid compared to that of the solid. You understand this? And this is our fifth experiment. So by all this, 1, 2, 3, 4. So using these 4 experiments, that is 2, 3, 4 and 5 experiments, there is something which is very common in all these 4 experiments. We did not do anything by forcing. Correct? We just added things into them, that's all. We just added honey, we just added this red ink, we just placed the food here, we just lighted this candlestick, whereas here also we just added copper sulphate. Everything started to flow very naturally. Correct? So the reason why everything started to flow very naturally is the particles that are present in matter. What are these? Particles present in matter are continuously moving. This is the reason why, the particles are getting diffused into other substances. You understand? And in the next session, we will continue with the remaining experiments, and we will make one more conclusion about the particles of matter. Okay, in this session we try to understand the characteristics of the particles of matter, and in understanding that, we made 2 conclusions out of the experiments that we have discussed. The first conclusion was matter has particles and there is a space between particle and particles of matter. That is the first thing that we have concluded. And the second thing we have concluded is that particles that are present inside the matter are continuously moving. So this is the second thing that we have concluded. Understood? I'll see you in the next session. Thank you so much.